So my NDE actually happened in 2017. In 2017, I had actually been in and out of the hospital over 22 times. Things were not going very well for me at that time. And so I ended up coming home one day, just a normal day. And I had actually decided to do some CBD, which was completely natural and legal at the time, to try to counteract some of the pain meds. There was a lot of pain meds whenever you're going in and out of the hospital. And so within about 30 seconds, all of a sudden, everything completely changed. It went from a completely normal day to all of a sudden feeling like everything in my body was completely shutting down. I had about, I mean, you're talking about maybe less than, again, another 30 seconds before I'm picking up the phone and I'm calling 911. And what's so interesting about this is that at the time, I was not alone. My mother was in the kitchen at the exact same time that this is happening. And so all I remember is looking at the phone, because again, everything is shutting down on me. So all I know is that my mom was there. I grabbed the phone, I called 911. I don't remember a lot of that conversation. I just remember her voice saying, "Someone will be out to you." And that's about the last thing I remember in this reality. Basically, at that point, I had collapsed and I had fallen to the ground. And so the next thing I know, I'm getting up. I'm just standing up. Everything again. It feels like I'm not inside of time, but I'm still looking at my same house. I couldn't figure out how I could feel this way and just be like walking around. And so the first thing that I thought at that exact moment was something catastrophic happened, like a comet or a nuke. Something massive happened, and everybody was in this space, which is why I would expect to see my mom, but she wasn't there. It was as if just completely gone. It was just me in this space. I'm walking around. As soon as I had the thought that it was everybody, was the exact moment that I also got the understanding this was just me. For whatever it was, I was going through this experience and it was just me. So I remember walking around the corner of my house. And prior to this happening, there was the news on, and there was just things that were going on at that time. And when I went around the corner to look at the TV, it was completely still. It was just completely frozen. And of course, that's why I'm thinking, I can't, something bad must have happened. And so once I realized that it was just me, and I'm in this space where things are just not really moving, my mom is suddenly gone, um, I questioned whether or not I died. And when I questioned whether or not I died, I had probably about 3 seconds of fear. That was it. It was about 3 seconds of fear. And then all of a sudden, it was like a tidal wave of you're okay, you're safe, you're loved. And not only okay, safe, and loved, I felt the complete opposite of basically aloneness, of separation, of fear. It was like just the complete opposite side of the pole. And I knew that I was going to be okay. So at this point in time, I had looked out the window and I had seen this rabbit. And what was so cool about this rabbit is that it was moving, but it was like watching as if you're watching energy. So it's moving, but I'm watching the energy of the rabbit before following behind the rabbit that's moving. It was really cool. Colors were absolutely amazing. I wish that I could actually like draw this or explain it, but it was like being in a neon world, except for it was our normal colors. So there were some colors I remember I had never seen before. There's no actual index that I could go to, but most of them were pretty much the exact same colors we see. They just were more vibrant than I had ever seen before. And the coolest part is it didn't hurt me. You know, how, like when you look in the sun and it's really bright, it can, you have to like squint your eyes. I didn't have to do that in this situation. And so I remember just being fascinated with that. And so then I kind of in my mind, because I can't really say that there was any sound. I don't remember any sound in this situation, but I do remember I was being guided. I was being spoken to. Um, and so I was told basically that what was coming next was basically behind these doors. And I couldn't see the doors at the time, but I was told that they were behind the doors. So I remember thinking to myself, I didn't have any friends. Prior to this situation, I was agoraphobic. I didn't leave my house. I had been in and out of the hospital so many times. I was terrified of people. I didn't like being around people. And so I was in my home. So prior to this moment, it was just me. It was basically just me. And like I said, my mom, but, difference between friends, And so at that time, my best friend was my lab. And so the fact that there were these doors that were coming to me, I hadn't seen them yet at this point. I didn't want to go through this alone. I wanted to go with my lab. So I remember actually calling my lab. Her name was Nova. I called my lab over to me and I sat down in this chair, this big brown chair that I have, and she saw me. And at the point that I called her over, I look over and I see my body lying on the ground. Like I hadn't seen it at that point because I turned around the corner. So I'm looking at my body. It's lying on the ground and she's coming over and she sees me. She sits down right next to me, lays her head on my lap. I remember petting her, but I didn't feel fur. I felt like vibration, like energy kind of thing. So I remember petting her. And at that point, I saw the doors. And the only way I can really kind of describe this is if you've ever seen the show Lost, they have these massive doors at the very end of the show. And that's what I saw. I saw these doors and I saw this light. And it wasn't the light that I was excited about, it was the feeling. Whatever was on the other side of those doors, I wanted. I was excited for what was coming next. There was no fear. There was no worry. There was no worried about whether I was going to hell. This is something I was very much afraid of throughout my life. And so I was ready. I closed my eyes. I remember taking in a breath. I had Nova next to me, and the exact moment that I felt like I was on the edge of ready is the exact moment that I'm now looking up from where my body was, and there's these EMTs that are above me, and they're speaking to me, but I can't hear anything. There was no sound whatsoever, and so they're trying to get me to wake up. They're trying to get me to be alert. My mom is now back in this scenario. She's standing there. They're trying to get me to speak. I finally speak. Then they got me to, they kind of stayed with me until I could hear, and then they stayed even longer. They stayed a very long time with me, which is very rare in these situations, which is why, in my mind, in my heart, I align that with they had to have known something kind of beyond what I knew because they didn't take me to the hospital. They didn't do anything except for make sure that I was okay and then sat with me for multiple hours. And so by the point that I could hear, by the point that I had accepted that I didn't die, because that's what took the most, it took a while to convince me that I was actually back. It was rather traumatic, to be honest with you, to come back in that exact moment and then not to hear. It was just a scary situation. But once the hearing came back, my sight was clear, things like that. I started to kind of calm down, understand the situation. I had family that had now come over at this point in time and were there for me. And so from that point on, my whole entire life changed because from that point on, I started receiving downloads like an antenna. I mean, it was basically just every day that I woke up, I was receiving quantum physics, numbers, you name it. And so that's kind of the pivotal point of my life.
Okay, so what was the main change that happened in you after this experience?
So the biggest change that happened to me, and again, this falls into my category of how I was raised. I spent my whole entire life in fear, which is why I was agoraphobic. Fear finally just won, and I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything. I didn't have friends, and I dated online. I went to school online, and I worked online. So I was safe, in my home kind of thing. And all of that started with the fear of hell. All of that started with the fear of what comes after death. I couldn't stop and take a breath because I was so afraid, of the next area of my life. And so in my NDE, when hell was not there, when there was no judgment, no, you messed up here or anything like that, it was just peace, calm, and understanding was the moment that now hell no longer was in my life. That fear was completely gone. And because that fear was gone, it was like alleviating a pressure of my life. It changed everything. I went from not working with people to literally preaching to meeting people to working with the homeless. I loved being around people after that moment.
Okay, so what other visions or experiences you remember from being on the other side?
So It's really interesting because it wasn't very long, at least from my perspective, but it felt like it could have been days. I'm walking from one location to the other, but as I'm walking, I'm being guided. So I'm having an internal conversation of what's going on, of how the universe works. I was kind of in the situation where every single place that I walked in this kind of circle that I was walking came with a whole different revelation I didn't have before. So the first one was that there was no hell, there was no pain. And not only that, there was the opposite. It was nothing but comfort and kindness, understanding, security. It was this overwhelming, like I said, just tidal wave of all these emotions and feelings. And as I'm walking and as I'm feeling these things, I'm also asking questions in my mind, like, why am I feeling this? And I'm getting just very quick answers of, this is the way the universe works. And I didn't quite understand at that time what that meant. It wasn't until I started receiving downloads later that would put pieces together to where I understood that in the 3D is the only place that fear exists. Because in the 3D is the only place that has the pole of fear and love. That's why it exists. It's so we can actually have a relationship. And a relationship isn't much of a relationship if you don't have the freedom to walk out on it or to leave it if you're not happy. And so the 3D is the place where you can have both. The 4D is not, or the afterlife is not. The afterlife is where you have understanding of the 3D, and so therefore no fear. So I was getting all of these understanding as I'm walking through this, but on the other side, I am also just trying to balance everything that is kind of coming at me at that point.
Okay, so you mentioned downloads. How these downloads exactly happen to you? I mean, you think about something, you want the answer, and then you start receiving those downloads.
Downloads for me started with very simple questions at first. And I started noticing, I started calling them downloads because I would have a question and within minutes, I would have the answer. So let's say that I had a question about something to do with aliens. And then all of a sudden, a video would pop up on my phone that would answer exactly the question I had. After the ninth one, which is why, of course, nine vibes, after the ninth one, I started understanding that no matter what I asked, there was going to be an answer. So I started asking a lot of questions. I really dove into as many questions as I could. I started asking the questions that I was afraid of. I started asking the questions that most people were afraid of, and I just kept receiving answers. And they kept getting more advanced as the more detail that I asked, the more detail I got back. So at first we asked very light, questions. What is this life about? How am I ever going to find love? Will I ever have abundance? But as I continued asking, I really got into the depth of quantum mechanics, harmony, patterns, and things like that.
Well, can I ask you about the lottery tickets for the next drawing?
I wish that you could. The most amazing thing about the lottery is the understanding that if you really manifested, if you really understood abundance, you wouldn't need the lottery. You would be able to bring in thousands, daily if you wanted to, versus having to, play the lottery. So it's kind of interesting because it's kind of one of those traps. It's there, but it shows then that manifestation is not what you're looking for, which is fair. Most people are just looking for security when it comes to money. They're not actually looking for how to hold it or how to continue holding it.
Okay, so basically, these downloads are like an answer to a prayer.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting that. It's an answer
Yeah.
to a prayer, and it's also the clarity of the question. So, in other words, the more downloads you get, the more clarity you get on the next question you want to ask. It's like if you were building with ABCs, once you master the ABCs, now you want to understand words. But once you master words, now you want to understand phrases, sentences. That's kind of how downloads work.
Yeah, but you're not asking these questions with your verbal skills. You are asking them when you're inside your head, right?
So that would actually depend. At the very beginning, yes, I was asking them in my mind, of course, because we're just not comfortable yet with our vibration of speaking these words out. As I've continued on this journey, I now understand the power of vibration. So it is very important that you speak. If you can't speak, right, for whatever reason, that's okay because that's why we have vibration of patterns. You could think something in your mind and then tap. a certain amount of times, that would basically equate to the vibration of your voice. But there is a very important part too. If you want to be heard by the universe, if you want to be heard by God, you have to speak it out loud. Because as I've continued this journey, I now understand that what happens in your mind is completely yours and yours alone, right? If you're having a conversation with someone, you can't read their mind and know what they're actually thinking in that conversation. And that's a good thing. That's that free will. You get to think whatever you want. And therefore, it is very important that what you speak out loud, you realize is actually being heard.
Okay, I speak four languages. In which language should I ask these questions?
Um, So specifically for you, any language, it's about the vibration. Language is just utterances of basically a buildup of words. And so it's really just about the vibration behind the words that you're using. Every language is speaking to the universe. It's just a question of whether or not you're using the vibration of your voice.
Okay. What are the most common downloads you've been receiving?
That's an interesting question because I don't know if common would be a word. So the most repetitive downloads that I do receive are geared towards what is happening right now in the world. So basically, 2017 is directly correlated to the Hebrew year of 5887, which is the exact same temperature of the sun in Kelvin. And so the reason it equates right to 2017 is because after 2017, you have 7 more years, or actually 6 years, 6 months, and 6 weeks, which is going to take you exactly to 2024. So we are in 7 years of, in the Bible, you could call it tribulation, but basically of change. We're in 7 years of change before 2024. And this is marked in the sky by the eclipse. August 21st, 2017 was a total solar eclipse that is going to cross through the USA. And then April 8th, 2024. So exactly 7 years to that point is going to be the cross of that. So it's marking a very, very important time. It is not a time of the end of times. It's a time of the end of a time. We have some very, very powerful and amazing stuff that is coming.
Yeah, so the big awakening is coming. This is what everybody is talking about, right?
Yes, the big awakening is coming. It's also a split, but not in the way that people think. So AI technology, being able to travel at the speed of light. This is something we have not mastered yet, and we're getting to that place, which then was going to allow the ability to upload consciousness. So there's a lot of really powerful stuff that is going to be revealed in 2024 because 2025, also known as 2025 or 252, which again is a very biblical number, is going to be the start of the next 1,000 years into that understanding. So when people say that things are going to change in 2 to 5 years, it's actually this year. 2024 is when we are going to be revealing these things.
Okay, so I understand from your backstory that you were suffering before you had this experience. Why do you think this suffering was given to you?
That is a very good question. So illness has been a very important part of my life and my family. In fact, whenever you talk to people who grew up in the church, there's usually a cornerstone to their faith, and mine was revolved around illness. The reason is because I have a younger sister who was born with cystic fibrosis. So everything about her health was put on us. When we make mistakes, she's the one who gets sick, not us. So I found it really fascinating that my whole life revolved around this moment where my younger sister could die, and that was the cornerstone of our family and our church. And here it is, I'm laying in the hospital and I could die before she dies. I mean, I'm going septic, I'm in and out. And so that moment for me changed things. It made me realize that this illness that I had actually was a gift because it allowed me to realize that life is so much greater than the things that we're actually building our lives on. The universe is so much greater than the foundation that we're building things on. And so for me, that allowed me to let go of illness being this massive boulder that was blocking my life and actually start looking at it and taking it apart as the small stone that was basically in my side.
Okay, before your experience, did you ever feel like a stranger on Earth?
No. In terms of, like, for instance, did I ever feel like I was more divine, or if I ever felt like I was angelic, or ever felt like I was not human? The answer would be no. I did feel left out. I didn't feel noticed, and obviously, it was very easy for me to become agoraphobic because I just didn't see the world anymore. I didn't go out in the world. But I felt more of a negative side to that than a positive side. I didn't feel like I was special. I felt like I was somebody who could just kind of disappear. And so it wasn't until after all of this that I even realized I had a light within me that I could share with anybody.
Okay, so now let's say if you ask a question right now in your head, can we get an answer right away? I'm going to ask you a question.
Would depend on the question, but absolutely, let's go.
Let's try. Okay. Are souls completely annihilated into the light after they have that experience, or they have the ability to come back and visit and see what we're doing here and feel what we're doing here and communicate with us? Or that's it. They disappear forever into the light.
Okay, so this one I can't answer. So the 3D is the way to answer this is to understand the difference between the 3D and the 4D. Einstein did a really fabulous job of trying to explain this in a scientific way. So the 3D is, I like to imagine it like this. The 3D borrows time. Okay. And because it borrows time, it means that time was created outside the 3D. So that's why Einstein put time in the 4D, where his space and time understanding came about. So we're borrowing time. And as we borrow time, imagine like one of those rolls, those plastic rolls. You're pulling on the plastic roll and you keep pulling it. And so there are people who use fear. And so what they're doing is they're wrapping this plastic around themselves until they suffocate. It's basically the understanding of fear. It just closes down on you to where you have a very limited perspective of this world. You have a very low quality of this life. And that's exactly what fear does. So at the end of your life, at the transition, and the reason I say your life is because life continues on indefinitely, right? It's just like nature. Whether you believe in nature or not doesn't stop nature from existing. So life is going to continue on. But at the moment that you transition, what is actually happening is it's a reverse. It's releasing all of that pressure simultaneously at the exact same moment, which then allows you to understand all of the decisions and all of the choices that were not only made by you, but were made by others in your life. You can understand why the pressure around someone you loved caused them to react the way that they did. And so in the 4D, you are able to have all the answers that you need to your own personal walk. You don't receive answers about Cleopatra. You don't receive answers about, anybody else's life. You receive them about your walk and the people that were involved in your life. And there's a reason, because bonds are basically the most important thing in our lives. And so you receive the answers you need for all the bonds that you built in this life. You also receive any answers that you want to the questions you have. You want to ask about the pyramids, if you are curious about the Bible, if you were curious about Oak Island or any of those things, you can ask those questions because it's all about understanding. Once you get the total amount of understanding, you will be brought forth with a question. You have two options. You can go back to the 3D, but to go back to the 3D means that you would say something to yourself like, I wish I would have done that better. And then therefore your wish, basically you'll be able to come back. If at that point you have the awareness, the understanding, and you say something different, like, I would like to move on, I would like to know what's next, then you have the option to move into another realm, which is going to be the 5D. People talk about this quite often when they talk about the 5D, but from what I understand, you can't actually go from the 3D to the 5D. It's only through the 4D. And it's because you have to make a choice. Some people want to come back. Some people want to do it differently. They want to be able to experience things now that they have that understanding. Other people are ready for, whatever it is that comes after that point. And so, yes, you absolutely will have a choice, because this whole entire existence, whether you're talking about the first D all the way to the 13th dimension, is all built on free will. If you remove free will from any of these points, so if you've ever seen the Metatron's cube made up of the fruit of life, which is the 13 circles, if you remove one of those, the whole cube collapses. And so, therefore, free will is basically what holds everything together. So you have to make that choice, and you can't make that choice until you have understanding.
Okay, so people reincarnate because they want to fix something in their lives, because they feel unfinished business and they come back here on their own, or they're turned back when they see God or Jesus or the entity that meets them. They're turned back to earth to finish their business.
Yeah, it can show up in many ways because our minds are very powerful. So it's however you perceive God, however you perceive your life, however you perceive these things, you will then have a choice. You can return to do it better, to do it differently, or you can absolutely move on, which is just going to take you into the afterlife. And what I love about the afterlife is this question. If you were to find someone in your life that you trust, that you love, that you have compassion for, and that you show kindness for, and you were to ask them to create your afterlife, you would trust it, right? It would be amazing. It would be like Disney World every day kind of thing. So the real question as to why people are afraid of what comes next is whether or not they trust what created it is going to create something that would be something they would want.
Okay, you said that bonds on this planet are very powerful. What is the significance of bonds between people or animals, or maybe between people and, I don't know, a hobby, a profession?
Right. So the reason that bonds are so powerful is because of the fact. So if you imagine a bond like a Vesica Pisces, you have one circle here, you have another circle here, and when they overlap, they have that space in between, which looks just like a little football. That is the most important shape in this whole entire universe. Because when it comes to a bond, you have to put a part of your energy, the other person in the bond has to put a part of their energy. And what is created in the center is your reality, right? So a mother and a father get together, or two partners get together, they end up creating a kid, or they end up having a family, they buy a house. Everything that's basically in that center is their creation. But the part that is really important about bonds is to understand that that energy that you put in actually starts vortex math. And vortex math is a pattern of binary. It's a pattern of basically technology. So when you put in your energy, which is technically zero point 0.5, and the other person puts in their energy, which is zero point 0.5, you create one. Vortex math starts in the understanding of 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, and it keeps repeating forever. So it generates the energy that holds a bond together. It gives you the energy that you need to basically get through your day. That's why by ourselves, we are everything and more. But without another, we are no thing to compare to. If we can say that we are kind, but we have never been kind to someone else, we're not actually kind. So it is very important that we have bonds with people because that's what actually gives us the fusion or the energy in our lives to continue going on. And so you can bond with people. You can also bond with God. In essence, what you're actually doing is you're taking you, and it doesn't matter if you call it God, doesn't matter if you call it Allah, doesn't matter if you call it Buddha. It's basically what you perceive as what created this universe. There's no judgment in any way, shape, or form. It's just what you perceive. When you bond with God, you actually create that center space. That center space is the I. It is the illumination. It basically allows you and God to connect. You can receive downloads. You can receive understanding. You can receive trust. And so you can bond with absolutely anything. And in fact, I teach that when I teach aerokinetics, which is just bonding with wind. Aero meaning wind, kinetics being practice. So it's literally bonding with wind. And so that's how I teach my students to move their pinwheels by themselves. It's not them doing it, it's them bonding with something that actually allows that process.
Yeah, this is one thing I didn't mention in my question, bonding with God, because people, when they bond with other people, and then you are dependent on somebody else. But with God, love is unconditional. And if you can bond successfully with God and with that energy, then you are free. Maybe you are awakened.
Yeah. So if you were to bond with God, what you're doing is you're putting God as unlimited potential into a limited potential, right? In other words, the moment you would want to observe God in your life is the moment you have to put God in a box or in a circle, however you want to perceive it, which is the understanding of squaring the circle or circling the square. The ancient understanding of it doesn't matter if it's a circle or a square, they're the exact same understanding. So once you do that, you're actually limiting that. You're putting God into a box, which then allows you to have a relationship with God. You can't have a relationship with God if God is in everything, right? Because then how would you view the world? You would look at everything and just love it and trust it, and that's not how we want to live. We choose our partners because we actually want some type of difference in this world.
Now, we talked about the reincarnation, about, a little bit we touched on the past lives. Why people don't remember their past lives?
So past lives are a little bit, I'm a little different on that one. So I asked the same question, and what I got from an answer in one of my downloads is that if I don't recognize the person on the corner today in the present moment, if I don't recognize that person as myself, I will never be able to recognize my past lives, right? Notice that when you talk to people about past lives, it's usually some very important figure, right? It's Joan of Arc, Cleopatra, King David, it's Solomon or,
Yeah,
Michael or anything like that.
Cleopatra,
And I understand,
Napoleon.
yeah, Napoleon, and I understand that because those are the characters that we see, and that's what we want when we think about the past. That's what we want to believe. We don't want to believe that we were, the poorest person on the street who could barely get by. We want to imagine we were kings and queens and, things like that. And if you think about it, it would be very difficult if you did remember everything, the loves that you had, the children you had, the life that you had, the choices that you had. And so, what I got in an answer was it's not so much about the memory of the past life, it's about the experience. And a way to put this into understanding is if you take a bowl of water and you dip your finger into that water for a total of 2 seconds, you have all the experience you need of what water feels like, what warmth feels like, what coolness feels like, what what it feels like to have something surrounding your finger. But you don't really care much about whether the bowl was blue or whether it was raining outside or any of those small details. So your past lives are about gaining experience. It's not about remembering things, and I think that's the reason why we don't is because even in this life today, it only matters because there's a light shined on it. After, and in fact, I experienced this in my afterlife. I didn't think of my family. I knew in that moment everyone was safe, everyone was okay. There was no worry or no fear, and so I was just ready for what came next.
Yeah, that's what near-death experiencers say. Yesterday, actually, I spoke with William Leston, and he said the same thing. He said, "I never looked back, and I didn't care." Basically, what he
Yeah,
said.
you just know,
And people, when
no,
they right, and when they live here on this earth, they have so many connections, so many bonds. They love, they are loved, and they expect to be the same connections on the other side. And when they go to the other side, they just lose all that and they don't miss it at all
right?
because that is universal love. And you don't need this human love anymore.
Yeah, you get filled with knowing instead of questions, and so therefore
Yeah.
you just don't have those blank spaces.
Yeah. I remember I told this story in one of my podcasts. I'm not sure I used it or not. I don't remember. But this is the story. I used to live close to a temple. And you can come over there and you can talk to a monk and you can tell him all his problems. And he's going to give you advice. It's like going to a priest and Catholic.
Right,
And I was young and I was a student. And I remember I was coming to see this monk. He was 90 years old or so, 80 something years old. And I wait for him. I was so anxious to wait for him. I had so many problems. I was whirling around my head. I had like 1,000 questions. And he just shows up and sits in front of me. And all my questions dissipated. I have no more questions. I'm just looking at him. He just envelops me with this light. And he's looking at me and smiling because he understands.
right.
And looks at me and smiling. He say, "Okay, so tell me." He said, "Tell me." You know what? I was crying
Yep.
because I had no more questions.
Yeah.
And just sit 10 minutes in front of him and left. I don't remember. I don't want to satsang. Maybe satsang it's called in the yoga Hindu tradition, when people just come to the guru to enlighten, to awaken person, and they just sit next to him. That's all.
Right, right.
Satsang when it's a question and answer. I'm not going to use this because I'm going to get a lot of critique from people who knows for sure. You would say, well, I didn't say that right. But that is a tradition in India, pretty much. I'm pretty sure right now in America and everywhere is like followers or devotees, they come in a certain day to see the guru
Mm,
or a person they follow, and they just sit next to him in a circle, and they just sit, and he doesn't even have to talk
right,
because this light, he's emanating this love. It's touching everybody,
right.
and they are already happy and watching that light.
Absolutely.
That's what happened to me when I was in the presence of that monk.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I didn't need any questions answered. For some reason, they all disappeared.
That's because we don't really actually have that many questions. Believe it or not, in the grand scheme of the universe, in your afterlife, if you were to write down, and even when I work with students, I'll have them write down, we go through questions right away because questions are the things that are blocking. So if we can just get through them, then we can start actually getting to, learning and teaching. And it's kind of the same thing. I have no doubt that that monk just cleared out everything. So it's nothing but radiating at that point. And if you're just radiating what the kingdom, in essence, right? Basically that energy, then yeah, it dissipates all that. We're not going to call it darkness, but it's not really darkness. It's just void. It's like the not knowing. It just fills in all those gaps. It's a really powerful experience.
Good and light. It's a void. He fills the void with light and love.
Yeah,
Now I heard this analogy that this planet is one of the hardest planets for people, for souls to evolve. Why people still always are drawn to this planet? There is over 8 billion people right now on this planet.
right.
Why do you think they're so eager to incarnate here?
Well, this is the only place that actually has physicality. So, for instance, if we go through dimensions, right, and because Earth is a dimension, first and foremost, it's the 3D, it's the third dimension. So if you go with the first, the one, we can't even measure that because the second you would try to measure the first, you're already in two. You'd have the measurement and then you'd have before the measurement. So once you're out of the 1D, you're into the 2D. Well, 2D is just duality, right? It's the up and the down, the left and the right. It's also the place that all numbers were created. In other words, there's no bias to numbers. They're just there. They create patterns. You either follow the pattern or you don't follow the pattern. Once you get out of the 2D, and this is the other thing that's interesting about the 2D is that in the 2D, there is no observer of the 2D. There's only 2D. So even if you go to the understanding of, let's say, fear and love, there is no observation of fear or observation of love. It's just the state, as Plato said, it's just the state that it exists. And so when you get into the 3D, that's where the observer comes in. That's literally the third person, aka the third eye, the third observation. So now you have love and you have fear, and only in the 3D can you choose one. And if you choose one, then you can have an actual experience. So the reason that the 3D, people will call it the most difficult, some people call it a school. I call it a playground. It's just awesome. But the reason that the 3D is more difficult is because of that understanding. If you're going to live in a world where there is love, you also have to understand it only exists unless fear exists as well. Opposites have to exist in the 3D to have an experience. If everything was just love, you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation. There'd be no reason to do a podcast because everything would just be love and we wouldn't dissect it as anything different. If everything is just cold, hot doesn't exist. We wouldn't even think to label anything as opposite because everything is just cold. So I love the 3D because it allows you that freedom. It allows you that choice to be able to say, I choose this or I don't choose this. It's only when we denounce our ability as humans to choose and feel like a choice was forced on us that then we lose the value of this life.
Yeah, I love this definition of this Earth, of this planet as a playground. It's a very good definition. If you can set that in your mind and remember all the time, okay, this is a playground, don't worry about it. That's an illusion of fear, that's an illusion of love. I'm just playing my role here.
Yeah.
We're all actors here, right?
All the world's a stage.
Yeah. Now, one question I'm going to ask you. We're going to conclude the podcast soon. Are you afraid of that?
I am not. I am not afraid of death at all. The only thing that I actually have a little fear of, and I'm glad for it because if you have no fear in this life, you won't be here very long. It's an anchor. And after my NDE, what I realized is I realized I didn't have any bonds. right? The purpose of bonds we were talking about. I didn't have any. So I came back to establish a bond, and I did. I met my partner, Caitlin. Everything in terms of meeting her was aligned with the number nine, including the address we met. Just everything was aligned with nine. So I trusted nines and I was following it. I met her. So the only thing that I have fear about is adding another person into that scenario, right? So now that I have a partner, how does it work in the grand scheme? Because for me, I understood, like we said at some point, you don't really think about other people. But if you have a partner, do you? And I don't know the answer because I haven't been through that experience. So the only thing that I worry about is not being with her. Other than that, if she is in this situation, we could be two stars in the sky for the rest of my life. I'm good with that. I don't have to be a physical body, but I don't know the answer to that. So, but in terms of death itself, not even a little bit. I am very, very confident in exactly what happens in the process of death.
Well, congratulations, my friend, for having such a strong and beautiful bond
Thank you.
that you want to be two stars in heaven. That's amazing. It's amazing analogy. Now, if people want to find more about you, about what you do, your website or a book or courses, can you please share that if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. I have multiple paths. So you can go to www.9 is in the number vibesuniversal.com. That is my website. I'm very upfront about that. It does have an $18 charge, but that is a one time, and then you have access to everything on the site. So I make custom Fibonacci songs for healing. I have a healing hub where I have taken all the herbs that we have and aligned them to the digital root, and then you put in the illness and it'll link you up to a page of different basically herbs that will help specifically for that illness, not aligned by what they do but aligned by their digital root. If you want to go a different route, you can go on Facebook and just look up Nine Vibes Universal. You'll be able to find me there as well. You can also go on Telegram. So I have multiple areas where people can reach out. You can also email me directly as I respond to everybody.